Thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. What is the value of stories in content marketing? The power of emotional storytelling can be a remarkable differentiator in how people remember your brand. When marketers look for advice on how to talk to a consumer, the advice from a master storyteller is incredibly valuable. Robert Rose is the founder and chief strategy officer for the Content Advisory, the education and consulting group for the Content Marketing Institute. He's a best-selling author and keynote speaker at marketing conferences across the country. We'll discuss strategies for how to make content that is just valuable and how to make it a strategic function for a brand. So let's listen to some stories about sharks on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. All right, thank you, Robert, so much for joining us here on A Shark's Perspective. First, I'd like you to walk us through, your history, your background, and your career. What in particular was it about content that made you dive in way past a toe on the water to where you're neck deep as an expert today?
Well, so first and foremost, Kenneth, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, it's a long question, and I'm not sure how much time we've got, but I'll just tell you the short version here, which is, so I'm 30 years now in marketing and come out of the television business. And in the early 2000s, I found myself the CMO of a software company, startup software company here in Los Angeles. And the venture capital people basically put millions of dollars on my desk and said, go do that marketing thing that you do, whatever it is you do, that magic you weave. And so I did something. I said, we were competing with Microsoft and Oracle and HP and all these huge companies that we were never going to beat from an SEO or an advertising, spend perspective. And so I said to the management team and my board, much to their consternation, I'm going to do something really different here, which is I'm not going to hire marketing people. I'm going to hire communicators, writers, video producers, and basically I built a little media department as my marketing team. And my theory is that I could teach them marketing, but I couldn't teach them how to communicate. And I basically turned this into a little media operation where we were blogging every day, we were creating white papers, we were at customer events, we were truly a mile deep and pretty much the recognized thought leader in our space, which was content management, enterprise content management in the early 2000s. And it worked. We started getting invited to the table, and when we would compete with the big Microsofts or Oracles or HPs out there, they would see us as, yes, we were a small company, but man, did we have a lot of thought leadership and perspective on the world. And so as we started to grow the company, I started going out on the speaking circuit telling my story, and I met this guy, Joe Pulizzi, and I read his book, Get Content, Get Customers, and he and I became very friendly and got on, just immediately, as you might expect. And we had dinner, and he was telling me that he was starting this thing called Content Marketing Institute that was going to really evangelize this idea of content marketing. And when I was done with the startup thing, I should come along and do something with him. And I said, well, it's funny you ask, because I'm actually ready to move on and hang up my own shingle and start my own thing. And so that was in 2010. And we started working together to build both Content Marketing Institute. And as we started getting further into it and building the organization to evangelize content marketing and created content marketing world and all the things we do now as part of CMI, we started getting inquiries from these larger organizations saying, hey, how do we set up content marketing as an operation? The people, the process, the technology. And so I set up my consulting practice basically built around that idea and have really spent the last, 8.5 years building and working toward, helping big enterprises figure out how to do content marketing. And in the intervening time, wrote another book with Joe, wrote another book with Carla Johnson, and so I've got 3 books in my pocket, and spend my time writing, speaking, and consulting.
So you're appearing at a lot of marketing conferences this year and a lot of years. That schedule's got to be grueling. I mean, the plane and the hotel room must be kind of your working desk. How do you make that all work and still balance out, the consulting engagements?
Yeah, it's tough. As I like to say, when people say, where's home for you? I say, well, it's usually 4A or 5A, depending
Yeah.
on whether I can get the window seat or not. Um, it is. It's challenging. It's really challenging because I don't work particularly well on airplanes, and so, the what I try and do is balance as best I can my speaking engagements and the on-site work that I'm doing with consulting, and orchestrate that to where I'm traveling fewer times but longer times. In other words, I'll try and schedule a week out of town where I've got 2 days on site with a client and a speaking engagement in either a nearby city or something that I can fly to, and then spend a week at home. So if I can, so it used to be that I was doing these little short trips every single week, and that didn't really work for me. But the longer trips, every third week or every second week is working a lot better for me from a being able to actually sit down and do heads down writing kind of thing.
So your books are exciting. I know your first book was an Amazon bestseller, and your second was another top seller. Killer Marketing's your third. I mean, tell us a little more about the evolution of what inspired you to write these books.
The first one was, quite frankly, to build a consulting business. That was my goal, and so what I did was I wrote it with Joe Falizzi, and we wanted to write basically the owner's manual of the content marketing approach, at least as it existed in 2011. And so that's what we set out to do, was to really write the how to, think about content marketing as an operation in business and use it, quite frankly, as a calling card in consulting. The second book, Experiences, the seventh era of marketing, that I wrote with Carla Johnson, quite frankly, that one was something that I just had to get out. Carla and I know each other from way back, and it was just something we could see that customer experience and marketing getting good at creating content-driven customer experiences as a means of strategy was just something that was happening. And as a student of marketing going way back, I just really wanted that out there in the world. And that was the one that we sort of custom published because, quite frankly, the traditional publishers were like, this is going to take a year and a half to get done. And we just said, this has got to get out there right away. And so I'm kind of proud to say that we were on the customer experience bandwagon before it was kind of a thing. But that was just something that I wanted to get out into the marketplace of ideas. And then the last book that I again wrote with Joe, which is Killing Marketing, was really something that we looked at as we were truly excited about, which was we were seeing companies, in some of the ones we were working with and some of the ones that we were hearing about, that were actually truly transforming their marketing strategy into something that would add to the bottom line, that would actually add cash or profitability to the bottom line, changing marketing from a cost structure to a profit structure. And that is something that still continues to excite me to this day, about the transformation of where marketing can be as a strategic point in the business. And so it was something that we really wanted to write on. I'm still out there, evangelizing that one. It's been a fun ride.
Let's dive then into one of my favorite parts of content marketing, and that's stories. What is the value of stories in content marketing, and how do you help leaders and brands and marketers tell their stories better?
Yeah, it's the value of stories is incredible, and there's plenty of scientific data to actually lean on in terms of showing how the power of storytelling and how it aligns in the brain and actually physically makes changes in the brain to where you actually remember things. And I'm literally just walking away from a conference I was at where there was a wonderful scientist out of Korea, a PhD, who's really spent the last 10 years studying how storytelling chemically affects the brain and how people remember stories more than they remember facts and figures, and actually start to associate the feelings in a story with the actual brand that brought them that story. And so that's a fascinating thing if you start talking about how marketers or communicators create impression upon a consumer. And storytelling is going to be the way to do that in the most positive and impactful way that you possibly can. And so there's value there. Now, the key is that most marketers don't get that as a skill. We are taught classically as marketers to describe the value of products and services rather than to create value with our stories. Creating value in the content in and of itself, without describing the product or service. And that's the real difference. And so when I go in and talk to businesses about helping them tell their stories better, it's in many ways helping them to just recognize and develop a muscle for creating value in content that stands alone. In other words, to sort of get out of the sort of myopic mindset of features, benefits, reasons to believe, adding adjectives to nouns to describe our products and services in ever more clever ways, and to rather work on creating content that is just valuable. Whether it's inspirational, it's how-to, it's educational, it's entertaining, it's just useful. Creating content that's just valuable in and of itself. And that's the core of a story. Now, there's more to it, obviously, than that, but if you can get to that core, that the value that you can create is in the content itself, well, you've taken a huge step to actually becoming a storyteller rather than just spewing content out that, describes features and benefits. And so hopefully when I talk with businesses, that's what I really focus on.
Do you run into a lot of times when brands just don't have a good story to tell? I mean, I know there's a lot of times when they can't communicate it, but you as a marketer, offering advice, do you just run into times when they don't even have a good story to tell?
Well, I run into plenty of times when they haven't discovered it yet.
Yes.
But I absolutely believe that every single company, every single person can be and does have good stories to tell.
Agree.
Now, though it may not match the product or the service. In other words, you can have a horribly bad product and a horribly bad service that, you tell a great story and it doesn't match. And so therefore the story doesn't work. Yeah. So it's not that every product has it can be successful. That's far from the truth. But there's no such thing as a boring product in my mind. I mean, I've seen powerful emotional stories from companies who sell welding torches. I've seen emotional, great educational content from companies that sell soldering equipment. I've seen amazing content come out of manufacturers and people who manufacture, conduit for piping. And so, you can't tell me that you have a boring product, thus you don't have an emotional story to tell. Everybody has the story there. It's quite frankly just having the courage and taking the time and the effort to find and discover the story that's inside.
So from a high level, I mean, you work with some pretty powerful brands, and I don't want you to dive in anything you shouldn't dive into with NDAs and whatnot. But can you walk us through some sort of tangible example of a successful content strategy for a marketing campaign? What kind of advice do you give brands when you start thinking through that strategy? Where do you kind of set those high level guidelines for them?
At the core of it, it's really about looking at content as a strategic function in the business. And what I mean by that is that most businesses look at the creation of content as just something that happens. It's kind of a byproduct of everybody's job. If you think about the job description that is typical in any communications role within any organization, must write well is usually one of the bullet points in the job description. And that is because we are expected as professionals in our jobs to be able to communicate. And so content ultimately becomes kind of this byproduct that everybody is expected to do, but nobody really has strategic responsibility for. And thus we shouldn't be surprised down the road as the company grows and becomes bigger and bigger, where everybody is creating content for their own particular needs. And if we're not terribly good at it, what do? Well, we hire a freelancer or an agency to help us create it. And so it never really has this thing that we create more of than pretty much anything else, including, by the way, the product or service we put into the marketplace. We create more of this stuff than anything, and yet it still doesn't have a centralized or a strategic approach put to it. And so it really is having the business sort of take a step back and go, let's look at everything we're creating here and why we're actually creating it. And then what we do is we typically look at it across 5 pressure points, that effort across 5 pressure points. The first is story. What story are we actually telling? What's the value that we can deliver to an audience? And the second is purpose. What is the purpose of that content, the business purpose? Is it to build an audience, to entertain, to inform, to sell, to persuade, to service? What is the purpose behind that content? And then third, who is the audience and how do we understand what they need? Because that's an incredible piece of knowledge that we have or have access to help us develop the first 2. And then fourth, what is the process? What is the process by which we take this idea forward? In other words, beyond just looking at it as one campaign, how do we look at content as an overall methodology and how do we develop it as a function in our business? And then lastly, of course, is the measurement. How are we measuring our efforts against the different content that has different purpose to different audiences that is serving multiple needs of the business? And if we start pressure testing our maturity level and gaps and things that we need to develop in order to deliver that, well, now we can put together a roadmap for us to get the right people, the processes, the technologies, and the strategies in place to actually make it an important part of what we do.
So with content, you're driving a consistent message across all types of different channels with different types of content. So, help lend your expertise to explain what types of content work best by channel, and say, for example, social versus web versus a newsletter versus email, and kind of help explain the how and why as to how they should all be tied together or work in symbiosis in an omni-channel type strategy.
Yeah. So when I think of omni-channel, I throw up in my mouth a little bit. And the reason I do is because there's a lot of advice going on out there that says you have to have this omni-channel strategy where you're everywhere, right? You're omniscient, literally the derivation of the word. And of course you can't be. I don't care if you're a marketing department of 1 or you have 1,000 in your marketing department. You cannot be everywhere. You certainly can't be everywhere and be effective. And so what I like to say is that it's not that we need to be everywhere. It's that we need the ability to be anywhere we need to be. And understanding those pressure points that I just went through is the key to understanding what channels we should be delivering on. In other words, there's no one answer to that question for any one business. Because anybody it's the classic, there's a company that will frequently send me email. I'm sure they send you email too. And they'll say stuff like, Tuesdays at noon are the best time to blog. And of course that's ridiculous because Tuesdays at noon might have been the best time to blog until they came out with the blog that said it's Tuesdays at noon are the best time to blog, because now everybody is blogging Tuesdays at noon. And so just like all of those things, any channel you create for your audience and the content you create for your audience needs to be based on the needs of that audience and your business purpose rather than on where everybody else is or what the most popular thing is. So as an example of that, we have constantly changed at Content Marketing Institute our newsletter strategy. I mean, we've changed it 30 times in the last 5 years. Reducing it based on audience needs, and they said, "Yeah, you're sending us too much." And then for a while we were sending it through social media, and they said, "No, we don't want to learn about it through social media. We prefer to learn about it through a webinar, and then through emails that were in a digest on Fridays." And so having that constant touch point with your audience to be able to go say, "How are we doing? Let's, give us feedback. Take a poll, take a survey. Let us know how we can deliver content better for you," will start to inform your channel strategy. When we start looking at what content works via a specific channel, my experience is that is true in a moment in time. And so if we look at video on social, big thing today, putting live video and video out on your social channels is incredibly popular right now. So should you do that, or should you create a program to put video on social? I don't know. I don't know until I understand your audience, the purpose you're trying to drive, and what it is we're going to be doing consistently over time to tell you whether that's going to be a good outcome. And then ultimately what the answer probably is let's test it. Let's test it and see if it works and see if it resonates with the audience.
So where do you see marketers succeed today, and where do you see them really fail with content marketing?
The biggest one is quite frankly in commitment and consistency. And what I mean by that is that in many cases, content marketing, and our research that we do every year shows this, where content marketing in many ways works, right? And so you'll have early success with it. And so what ends up happening is that one or two people become the sort of keepers of the content marketing, or the beta testers of content marketing, if you will, and it has that early success. And so inevitably what happens is the business starts to demand more and more and more. And pretty soon those two people, and maybe they even call themselves the content marketing team, are the on-demand vending machine of content for the rest of the organization. And inevitably quality starts to decline. And so inevitably results start to decline and people lose faith. And so we start stopping and starting and stopping and rebooting and trying things again. And ultimately, that blog where we were blogging consistently for the last 4 months, every Monday at 5 o'clock, well, now, we kind of don't have time for it this month. Okay, so we'll let it go. And that white paper that we were putting out every quarter, we don't have time for one of those, or we don't have budget, or sales is really in the way, and we need to do something else this quarter. And so we start treating content marketing like campaigns that we can jettison every now and again, rather than sort of things that we should do as an ongoing thing. And those that we find that are successful in almost a very stark difference, something like 80% to 20%. The ones that are successful with it are consistent. If you can only blog once a month, great. Blog once a month, but do it not just once a month, but like on the 15th at 8 a.m. and release it at every single, so that you're creating an appointment and training your audience to depend on that content every single month or every single week or every single day. And that consistency is the biggest, and commitment is, quite frankly, the biggest failure that we see than in anybody attempting content marketing.
So, Robert, I'm going to take a stab in talking about your company, and guess that you're helping people get advice on content. I think I'm going to take a wild leap based on the name of the company being the Content Advisory.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go stretch too far, but tell us a little bit about, what that does. I've worked in, and the reason I'm asking this is not only just to give you a chance to talk about your company, but like you just said, with somebody being the gatekeeper, each group has an expertise, but content advice is really a different level of expertise. And I know your practice offers that type of expertise to help people adopt this as a whole. So talk a little bit about what the Content Advisory does and how you help companies and brands a little bit differently than a lot of the other types of agencies would in other aspects of marketing.
Sure. Obviously happy to. Yeah. And so it's, look, I have a little saying that is probably a little too cute, which is, we're not here to tell you what your story should be. We're here, hopefully, just to help you tell it a little better. And what that means really is that we're in the business of helping companies understand how to stand up their content strategy. And so I'm not here to help brand. I'm not here to help write. I'm not here to help, create websites or do anything like that. Our business is really to help organizations understand how to operationalize a content strategy. And what that ultimately results in is those looking at those pressure points that I talked about earlier, and helping an organization figure out the team structure, the operational model, the technology that can help them do this, and ultimately the roadmap for the strategy of implementing this as a strategic function in their business, how that works. And most of the time that, comes wrapped up in some form of initial initiative. Right? It's like, yes, we want to create content as a strategic function, but we also have this immediate thing that we want to do. We want to launch a blog, or we want to launch a magazine, or we want to launch an event, or we want to launch, there's something that they've wanted to do. So it usually comes in context with, great, here's the longer term plan of standing up content so that you can actually do it consistently and commit to it over time. But let's also lay on this short-term goal of helping you what it would look like to launch your first initiative, your first platform, whether that's a website or a blog, and help them put together the planning things that they're going to need to think about in order to put that all together, and help them develop a budget and a structure and a plan and those types of things. And then on the back side of that, we can certainly make recommendations to the agencies, technologies, and writers and creative people who can actually help them execute against that. But our goal is really to help companies, operationalize the function of content.
You've got a new book, Killing Marketing. If you would, kind of let people know. I know that they're going to be able to see you at a marketing conference soon in a location near you, but tell us where we can find out more about you. Sure.
Well, you can get the book of any of your favorite online bookstores, of course, and it's available in numerous formats. If you're interested in watching the trailer or reading a little more about it, it's at killingmarketing.com. Lucky enough to get that domain. And you can learn more about the business, of course, at contentadvisory.net, and about me at robertrose.net. I have all the .net domains. Somebody told me once that's the dad genes of domains, so I managed to get both of those. Those are the three major resources.
Well, thank you very much, Robert, for being on A Shark's Perspective. Really enjoyed the time.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So there was my conversation with Robert Rose, the founder and chief strategy officer for the Content Advisory, the education and consulting group for the Content Marketing Institute. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from that conversation. First, people remember stories well. There is some scientific proof that shows that people remember it better than facts and figures. Most marketers don't get that as a skill. Many can explain but not create it with great storytelling to create value and content that stands alone. If you can get to that core, that the value that you can create is in the content itself, well, then you've taken a huge step in becoming a storyteller rather than just spewing out content that describes features and benefits. Second, when you consider an omni-channel approach with content, it's not that we need to be everywhere, but we need the ability to be anywhere we can be. Any channel you create for your audience and the content you create for that audience needs to be based on their needs and your business purpose rather than on where everyone else is or what the most popular thing is. How content works on a specific channel can be just because it's a moment in time. And make sure to consider those pressure points. What stories are we telling? What is the purpose of the content? Who is the audience? What is the process? And how are we measuring those efforts? Third, commitment and consistency is where marketers succeed and fail in content marketing. If you blog once a month, then make sure you blog once a month and do it consistently at the same time in order to train your audience. Keep them coming back for more. Got a question? Feel free to find me on LinkedIn or send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this show regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. It's time to tell a story with some great content. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.